So when we left off last time, we were talking about Netflix and how Netflix utilizes Amazon EC2, Amazon RDS, and Amazon S3. And we talked about how Amazon uses EC2 for web hosting. They use RDS or other AWS database services for things like customer account information and inventory catalog, and how they would also use something like Amazon S3 as the mass storage service for all of the video files for all of the movies and TV shows that they would like to stream to their customers. So now I want to talk about what actually happens when you hit play on one of the movies or TV episodes on Netflix. And so generally what happens here is this is again where EC2 comes back into play. Now, if you remember, I described EC2 as a computer that has a processor and it has processing power. So that is generally one of the main things that Amazon EC2 is used for, is anything that requires computer processing, right? As opposed to something like Amazon E3, which is just for storage, or a database, which is for organizing information. Amazon EC2 is for things that need compute power. So when somebody hits play on Netflix, what occurs is that the Netflix code has to go to S3, find that particular television show or movie, pull that file, and then on the Amazon EC2 instance, they're going to either encode or transcode that movie or that piece of data so that it is ready to be sent across the internet down to the user so it can be viewed on their device. So encoding or transcoding video, again, is very processor intensive, and so it requires something like an EC2 server in order to accomplish that task. So again, just to recap, as this is a very quick video, Amazon EC2 is good for any type of processing activity. So whether that's web hosting, whether it's an encoding, transcoding, whether it's something that is graphically intensive, whether it's something where there's a lot of mathematical equations going on, anything that needs general basic processing, EC2 is the solution that you're looking for. So, as promised in the previous video, here we're going to dive into Netflix and understand how Netflix uses AWS resources such as EC2, RDS, and Amazon S3 to power their website. Now, I'm using Netflix because it is probably one of the most well-known websites in the world, and I assume that most of you either have a Netflix account, use Netflix on a regular basis, or at least somewhat aware of what Netflix is. But if you aren't, just understand that Netflix is probably right now the world's #1 provider of video content, streaming video content, and they are AWS's #1 customer or user of cloud resources. Now, specifically how Netflix utilizes and uses AWS, again, this is a drastic oversimplification of how Netflix actually uses AWS. They use a lot more than just these three services. So as mentioned earlier, in this particular video, we're going to talk specifically about Amazon EC2. So right now, let's just get rid of those other two and focus specifically on Amazon EC2 and what EC2 is. So Amazon EC2 is short for Elastic Cloud Compute, but don't worry about remembering that right now. All you need to know is conceptually what EC2 is and what it does. So when you talk about EC2, what I want you to do is just think about a basic computer. That's basically what EC2 is. It's the virtual equivalent of the computer that is currently sitting in front of you. Again, that is a drastic oversimplification, but in terms of the concept, that's essentially what it is. So what does a basic computer have, right? It has a CPU for processing power, an operating system, in AWS's case, either Linux or Windows. It has a hard drive or local storage, a network card, how it can access the internet. It has a firewall for security, and RAM to access and run programs. However, in terms of AWS, I don't want you to actually think about a base computer. I want you to think about a server computer, because generally AWS is used by enterprise companies, and generally they're using these computers or this compute power as servers. So now I want to introduce another piece of cloud terminology called instance. So a lot of times in AWS, an EC2 server will be referred to as an EC2 instance. So you will hear terms like provision an EC2 instance or spin up an EC2 instance. So if you hear instance, just think server. When you hear instance or server, just think EC2. And if that is still a little unclear to you, you can always just think about EC2 as a basic computer, right? It just has these components, and then you can do with it whatever you would like. So now, how does Netflix specifically use EC2? So when you go to www.netflix.com, you come to their homepage, and you would see something that looks exactly like this. So in essence, what the Amazon EC2 instance is doing is it's acting as a server or a web hosting server. So when you go to www.netflix.com as a user, so you're here, you have an internet connection, you go to www.netflix.com, you are in essence connecting to an Amazon EC2 instance, which is currently serving as a web hosting server, and that EC2 instance contains all the files and the code to give you this page. So that is one of the main features and functions of an Amazon EC2 instance in the world of Netflix, or in most of the internet as a whole, is it acts as a web hosting server. It contains all of the files and code needed to display a web page to any particular user that visits their site. Okay, so again, let's quickly recap. I want you to think of EC2 as a virtual computer that you can use for whatever you like. One of the common uses of that is as a web hosting server. Also, we introduced the cloud term instance, which is another way of referring to an EC2 server.